A small town in Missouri, a picture-perfect family, and a chilling crime that would leave an entire community in shock. When investigators entered the Coleman home, they found a scene straight out of a nightmare. Messages scrawled on the walls, a family lifeless in their beds, and a story that would reveal betrayal, deception, and cold-blooded murder. This is the case of Christopher Coleman, the man who destroyed his own family in pursuit of a new life. Hey, true crime fans! I'm your host, Eamon, and I'm thrilled to share crime tales across times with you. Each episode will explore a new case, examining the evidence and discussing the twists and turns. My goal is to create a community where we can discuss these cases, share our thoughts, and learn from each other. So let's get started. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in Columbia, Illinois, a small town known for its close-knit community and low crime rate. But on May 5th, 2009, the tranquility was shattered by a chilling discovery. At 6:43 a.m., Christopher Coleman, a security chief for televangelist Joyce Meyer, called his neighbor and close friend, Detective Justin Barlow. Coleman sounded frantic. He couldn't reach his wife, Sherry. He had tried calling her multiple times after leaving for the gym around 5:40 a.m., but she never picked up. He asked Barlow, who lived just a few doors down, to check on her. Barlow, concerned, called for backup before approaching the home. Within minutes, Columbia police officers arrived and forced their way inside. The scene they encountered was nothing short of a nightmare. Sherry Coleman, 31 years old, was found lifeless in her bedroom, lying face down in her bed. Her two sons, Garrett, 11, and Gavin, 9, were discovered in their respective rooms, also strangled in their sleep. The murder weapon? A deep red ligature mark on their necks suggested they had been choked with a rope or cord, their final moments marked by silent horror. But there was something even more disturbing. The walls of the house were defaced with large red spray-painted messages. Phrases like, "You have paid and punished," screamed from the walls in bold, erratic handwriting. The chaotic nature of the vandalism suggested an act of rage, possibly revenge. The killer had taken the time not only to end 3 lives, but to leave behind a message, as if making a statement. To detectives, it initially looked like a home invasion gone horribly wrong. But as they examined the crime scene, a feeling of unease crept in. Something didn't add up. Christopher "Chris" Coleman, by all outward appearances, was a man who had everything: a stable career, a beautiful family, and a life built around faith. Born in 1977, Chris was raised in a strict religious household. His father was a pastor, and the Coleman family held deep Christian values. From a young age, he was taught the importance of faith, family, and discipline. Those who knew him described him as serious, disciplined, and intensely focused on success. Chris eventually joined the United States Marine Corps, where he developed a reputation for being rigid, by the book, and highly disciplined. It was during his service that he met Sherry Weiss, a vibrant and outgoing woman with a warm, infectious personality. Their relationship moved quickly, and against his family's wishes, Chris and Sherry married in 1997. His parents disapproved of the marriage because Sherry had a more relaxed, free-spirited approach to life, which clashed with Chris's strict religious upbringing. Despite their objections, the couple built a life together and eventually had 2 sons, Garrett and Gavin. After leaving the military, Chris secured a high-profile job as head of security for televangelist Joyce Meyer, a well-known Christian speaker and author with a massive following. His job came with significant responsibility, including protecting Meyer, her staff, and her ministry from potential threats. It was a prestigious position, one that provided financial security, status, and frequent travel. But behind closed doors, Chris's perfect life was beginning to crumble. Despite their seemingly happy facade, Chris and Sherry's marriage had been strained for years. Friends noticed that Sherry was deeply unhappy, and at times, she confided in them about Chris's controlling behavior. Chris was emotionally distant and often cold toward her. He spent long hours at work and seemed disinterested in their family life. The couple frequently argued, and Sherry had reportedly considered divorce. What no one knew, at least not yet, was that Chris was hiding a dark secret. For months, he had been having an affair with Tara Lintz, a woman from Florida who was also Sherry's childhood friend. Tara was younger, blonde, and fit the image of what Chris likely desired in a partner. Their affair had been ongoing for at least 6 months before the murders, and Chris had promised Tara that they would be together. Chris and Tara's relationship was intense and filled with promises of a future together. He told her that he loved her and wanted to marry her. They frequently exchanged explicit messages and videos, their conversations leaving little doubt about the depth of their relationship. Investigators later discovered hundreds of texts and emails, some of which detailed their plans for a future without Sherry and the children. Chris had even given Tara a promise ring, symbolizing his commitment to her. But there was one major problem. Sherry and the kids stood in the way of his new life. For Chris, divorce wasn't an option due to the strict rules of Joyce Meyer Ministries against adultery and divorce. Leaving his wife would risk his 6-figure salary, reputation, and financial security. Chris and Sherry enjoyed a comfortable life in their beautiful home in Columbia, Illinois, with nice cars and financial stability. A divorce would mean child support, alimony, and financial instability, which Chris wasn't willing to accept. Chris's controlling and emotionally distant nature led him to prioritize maintaining his image as a man of faith while pursuing his relationship with Tara. He believed he could have it all if his wife and children were gone. So he needed another way out. And in the months leading up to the murders, Chris had been planning something terrible. Chris reported receiving anonymous death threats against himself and his family. The threats demanded he stop working for Joyce Meyer, or his family would be harmed. The emails were poorly written, appearing to be from someone angry at the ministry. Chris told friends and co-workers about the threats, planting the idea that an unknown stalker wanted to kill his family. He likely hoped this would mislead investigators when the crime eventually occurred. But Chris made one major mistake. He underestimated the detectives who would soon unravel his carefully constructed lies. When officers called Chris Coleman to inform him of the brutal murders of his wife and children, his reaction was oddly calm. He didn't break down in shock or frantically ask about his family. Instead, his response was eerily composed. He simply said, "What do you mean? What happened?" His reaction immediately raised suspicions. Rather than rushing home in distress, Chris remained on the phone, methodically asking officers multiple questions about what they had found at the scene. Investigators noted that his responses felt rehearsed, as if he had already prepared for this moment. As officers examined the crime scene, they found unsettling inconsistencies. The messages scrawled in red spray paint on the walls appeared hurriedly written, as if done in a panic. Yet, despite the staged threats, there were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows, no pried open doors, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. The so-called intruder had left no trace, except for the spray-painted messages inside the house. If this were truly the work of someone who wanted to terrorize the family, why would they only leave their mark inside, where no one but investigators would see? Detective Barlow, who had known Chris personally, immediately sensed something was off. Why would a random intruder break in, kill only Sherry and the children, and then leave without taking a single thing? If the break-in was connected to the threats Chris had been receiving, why was he the only one left unharmed? Nothing about the scene made sense. Investigators couldn't shake the feeling that everything had been carefully orchestrated to mislead them. Chris claimed he had left for the gym at 5:40 a.m. and had started calling Sherry repeatedly when she didn't answer. But forensic experts determined that the murders had occurred around 3 a.m., meaning Chris had been home at the time his wife and sons were killed. His alibi crumbled further when investigators traced the threatening emails and letters he had reported over the past few months. Shockingly, they had all been sent from Chris's own laptop. The poorly written threats, meant to appear as if they came from an anonymous stalker, matched Chris's grammar and writing style. It became evident that he had staged the entire harassment campaign against himself. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood added another damning piece of evidence. The cameras showed no unknown vehicles, no suspicious individuals lurking around the house, and no sign of a break-in. The only person who had access to the house that night was Chris Coleman. And yet, when questioned, Chris repeatedly denied any involvement. He also firmly denied having an affair. However, investigators soon uncovered a shocking betrayal. When they interviewed Tara Lintz, she openly admitted that she and Chris had been in a relationship for months. She revealed that Chris had promised to marry her and had even told her he planned to leave Sherry soon. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered yet another damning piece of evidence. Forensic experts found traces of spray paint on Chris's hands, the same red paint used to stage the crime scene. His claims of being at the gym that morning no longer held any weight. Perhaps the most chilling revelation came from one of Sherry's closest friends. She confided in investigators that Sherry had long suspected Chris of cheating. More disturbingly, Sherry had once made a haunting statement. "If anything happens to me, Chris did it." With overwhelming evidence mounting against him, the truth became undeniable. The threatening messages, the staged break-in, the affair, and the forensic findings all pointed to one person, Chris Coleman. What seemed at first like a terrifying home invasion was, in reality, a calculated and cold-blooded crime committed by the very man who was supposed to protect his family. On May 19, 2009, just 2 weeks after the brutal murders of his wife and 2 young sons, Christopher Coleman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the community. To outsiders, the Colemans had seemed like the perfect family, deeply religious, financially stable, and living a seemingly happy life. However, beneath that carefully crafted image lay a far darker reality. As the details of the case emerged, prosecutors painted a chilling picture of a man willing to destroy his own family to start a new life with his mistress. They pushed for the death penalty, arguing that Chris had meticulously planned and executed the murders with cold-blooded precision. With the trial approaching, investigators continued to uncover overwhelming evidence, leaving little doubt that Chris was the only person who could have committed these horrific crimes. During the trial, the prosecution laid out every disturbing detail of how Chris plotted and carried out the killings. He had spent months fabricating threatening emails and letters, making it appear as if his family was being targeted by an unknown stalker. However, forensic experts traced these messages back to his own laptop, proving that the threats were nothing more than a cover-up for the crime he was planning. Chris had also denied having an affair, but investigators unearthed a trove of explicit emails, text messages, and intimate photos exchanged between him and Tara Lintz, his longtime mistress. The most damning discovery was that Chris had promised to marry Tara by the summer of 2009, just weeks after the murders. Physical evidence also worked against him. Tiny specks of red spray paint, identical to the graffiti found inside his home, were discovered on Chris's hands. This directly linked him to the crime scene. Even more disturbing was a statement made by Sherry Coleman to one of her closest friends. She had confided her fears, saying that if anything ever happened to her, Chris would be responsible. Her words now stood as a haunting warning that had tragically come true. Chris's alibi quickly fell apart under forensic scrutiny. He claimed he had left for the gym at 5:40 a.m. and began calling Sherry shortly after, trying to establish a timeline that made it seem as if he was away when the crime occurred. In a desperate attempt to deflect blame, Chris's defense team argued that an unknown intruder could have committed the murders. They suggested the possibility of a stalker or a home invader seeking revenge. However, they had no logical explanation for several key questions. If this was a targeted attack, why had Chris remained unharmed? Why were the threatening messages traced back to Chris's own computer? Why was there no evidence of a break-in? The inconsistencies in the defense's argument only strengthened the prosecution's case. After a tense trial, the jury deliberated for 14 hours before reaching a verdict. On May 5, 2011, exactly 2 years after the murders, Chris Coleman was found guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. Because Illinois had recently abolished the death penalty, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge did not mince words, calling the murders cold, calculated, and purely driven by selfish motives. Chris had killed his family in pursuit of a new life, believing he could get away with it. But in the end, the evidence was undeniable, and justice was served for Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin Coleman. The brutal murder of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin devastated the community. Sherry's family was heartbroken, knowing Chris was controlling, but never imagining he was capable of such evil. The Columbia, Illinois community was shaken, as many of Chris's former church friends struggled to believe he had murdered his own family. After testifying against Chris, Tara Lintz went into hiding, cutting ties with him forever and facing intense media scrutiny. Chris Coleman had a perfect life. A wife, children, a well-paying job, and a respected position in his community. However, his desire for another woman and fear of financial ruin led him to slaughter his own family. This case raises disturbing questions. What drives a person to kill the people they once claimed to love? Could this tragedy have been prevented if Sherry had left Chris earlier? What signs should people look for in controlling or dangerous relationships? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking true crime stories from around the world. Until next time, stay safe and stay vigilant. This is Crime Tales Across Times, signing off.